Hi, I'm Dan Sarowitz. I'm an emeritus professor of science and society at Arizona State University, and I'm here to discuss a new book called An Advanced Introduction to Innovation and Public Values by my colleagues, JP Nelson and Barry Bozeman. JP is an incoming assistant professor of public policy at Oregon State University, and Barry Bozeman is emeritus professor and regents professor at Arizona State University, also of public policy. An advanced intro to innovation and public values. That's a mouthful, and I'll quickly try to get past the mouthful by saying I think whoever is listening to this can intuit the meaning of the separate words. Innovation, something we all have a feel for. It's a big buzzword these days, and it really means to, in some general way, to do things in new ways, often to do new things in new ways. Public values, perhaps a less common word, but refers to the shared values in a society around aspirations and hopes and the things that guide behavior and action. But bringing those two together is a novel a novel construction. So let me turn to the authors and say, what do you hope to accomplish by talking about innovation and public values?
So people have been talking about societal implications of technology for, literally millennia. I think in one of the early chapters of the book, we talk about Plato being concerned that writing was going to cause people to remember things less effectively. And, you could speed forward to the Industrial Revolution and you get lots of people talking about how, concerns about largely the effects of industrialization upon the working class, but also eventually upon the environment. And of course, people have been very worried about the societal effects of things like nuclear energy, genetically modified organisms, much more recently, artificial intelligence, for a very long time as well. And a lot of scholars in the social sciences and activists and government officials as well have worked on trying to figure out ways to ensure that technologies do more good than harm for society, broadly speaking. But a lot of these approaches, which have gone under names such as responsible innovation or sometimes anticipatory governance, public interest technology, are often very procedural and don't always have a strong connection to well-established public priorities. And this is a problem that's been addressed in other fields as well. The concept of public values was developed by my co-author largely as a counterbalance to the idea that economic efficiency was the only criterion by which public policy and economic outcomes ought to be judged. And so our goal is to bring these well-established goals of society, which are referred to as public values, things like freedom of speech and religion, things like public health, things like shared economic prosperity, and to analytically understand how technologies or how technological change affects these things, and what can be done to improve technological change's effects on those societal
Well,
goals.
let me ask what's really the problem here? As you said, going back to Plato, who complained that writing was going to be damaging to our ability to remember things, isn't the one of the lessons that innovators will often point to is, oh, people are always complaining about new innovations, and then we get over it, and the world progresses, and we're better off. So, what's the matter with that perspective?
Well, sometimes the world's not better off. Sometimes the world is a lot worse off. The world is probably not inherently better because we have some really sophisticated neutron bomb technology that probably hasn't done very much for us. But there's countless examples. So, looking back to when I began my career, what one of my earliest concerns was with innovation. And it took me about 30 seconds to figure out that there's very strong pro-innovation bias in the literature. And there's lots of reasons for that. One is that we in the United States live in a society that has I wouldn't say a peculiar economy, but a distinctive one. And our concepts of innovation match up against it very well. And as a result, the concepts of innovation have the same strengths and weaknesses as the economy because it maps against it in terms of outcomes, in terms of evaluation, in terms of what we think of as success. And related, most innovations are thought of as occurring in the private sector, in a market economy. Most of them do. But as a matter of fact, in the private sector, we expect people to make evaluations according to profit and shareholder wealth. And in many cases, that does not track very well against public benefit. And of course, some of those times in which it does track against public benefit, it's not really a money-making proposition. So one of the primary ideas behind public value innovation is not simply to overturn everything that we think that we know about innovation, but to introduce the idea that maybe there's multiple criteria about which we want to use to evaluate innovation. And one of those might be benefits to the public, and even something a little bit more notorious, the distribution of the benefits and what has become an increasingly inequitable society.
So let me ask you then about what this book contributes that other recent literature in this area has not. I mean, going back certainly at least to well, you can start with Marx if you'd like, but in the last 50 to 60 years, post-World War II era, there's been critiques by Lewis Mumford and Jacques Ellul and Langdon Winter, and of course the fictional critiques from sci-fi writers like Orwell and Bradbury and Huxley, going back even a bit further. So the idea that innovation is not an unalloyed good is certainly not a new one, and social scientists have been involved with that critique for at least 50 or 60 or more years. So what does this book on innovation and public values bring to the discussion that is needed and necessary and valuable?
Simple. It's not only a critique. So the literature you're talking about, I know that literature fairly well myself, and the often it stops with the critique part. It stops with this is wrong, it needs to be made right. So one of the things that we do is we try to talk about some particular approaches that could be used to examining innovation and trying to at least use the multiple criteria, because we present some multiple criteria that could be considered when people assess innovation. So I think probably the nature of our critique is not wildly different. The one difference is it's based on a particularistic theory about the nature of the public interest. But the primary difference is we try to also go beyond the critique and say, and here are some things we could possibly do.
So let's talk about things we could possibly do, and in maybe the following context, because you've already mentioned how, in a sense, the system, and especially the American system, is inherently biased towards thinking that innovation is good. And actually, you write, I'm going to just a brief quote here. Much innovation does nothing to advance public values. And then you have a really important parenthetical after that, including economic prosperity. And that's in parentheses. But that seems to go against everything that we as Americans believe about technology and wealth, and including economists, and wealth creation and even public values. So, what can be done to destabilize this almost structural bias in the way we talk about innovation and public value, and how does your book give us some tools to do that?
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems to me that part of what we want to do is to kind of complicate the pro-innovation, anti-innovation framing that often appears in the literature. Stereotype is, you go to a business school and innovation is only a good thing, and you like go to the humanities department and everyone's complaining about new technologies. We don't think it's really controversial to say that, some innovations do things that people like and some innovations do things that people don't like. And most innovations do things that are good for some people and bad for others. And we want to have more innovations that are better for more people and fewer innovations which are worse for more people. We call this typology of different ways that innovations can relate to public values. They can advance public values purely. That's not very many innovations, but some do. They can advance some public values and undercut others. They can mostly just undercut public values, or they can have no effect on public values at all. If we think about innovations that undercut public values, we can think about perhaps Ponzi schemes or illegal distribution of methamphetamines. These are things that pretty much everybody agrees hurt a lot of people and don't really do much benefit for the public. And so those are real forms of innovation. They're people doing new things, but they're things that we don't want people to do. Um, when we think about mixed public value innovations, most big innovations fall into this bucket, honestly. Industrialized agriculture in the United States has made a lot of food a lot cheaper for a lot of Americans, but has also driven a lot of family farms out of business and led to consolidation in the agribusiness industry. So you can see some benefits for end consumers, but perhaps fewer benefits for workers or former small family farm owners. And then in the pure public value innovations category, it's a little bit hard to identify because most innovations that do benefit a large number of people also end up harming some people in some way. But we like the example of the polio vaccine, which eliminated a major public health problem, and did not really cause any harm to any major public values, in our view.
Okay, so let me take that point and connect it to a big theory that you may or may not agree with, and then ask a final question, which is one might look at the state of political unhappiness in this country in part as a reflection of our failure to attend carefully to the public value implications of innovation. Especially in for example, the destruction of the manufacturing base and the replacement of a reasonably well-paying manufacturing labor sector with a service sector that doesn't do nearly so well. So that could be seen as, in a sense, a reflection of not attending to innovation and public value. So given the current political moment, given the concern over AI, which was mentioned earlier, and its potential implications for future economic creative destruction. And given that you say towards the end of your book, public value innovation is an ideal but an achievable one, what are a couple of pathways for achieving a greater attention to public values and innovation, and how might readers of this book take away lessons that can allow us to begin to pursue such a pathway?
So, although artificial intelligence and many other emerging technologies that people are worried about are new, the problems of dealing with new opportunities and new dangers created by emerging technologies are not that new. And our societies have been doing this for really quite a while. And there's a lot of stuff in the toolkit. Governments, of course, are organizations to which we accord a lot of responsibility for advancing the public interest or public values. And governments can do a lot of things. Often we think of regulation in order to try to limit the downsides of innovation or to limit potentially destructive innovation. For example, governments sometimes place substantial limits on innovation in financial products in the financial sector to essentially prevent people from getting scammed, prevent things like what a failure of regulation did in leading to the 2008 financial crisis. A lot of innovation in financial products led to that, but not the kind of innovation that's good for people. But also innovation, or also a regulation of pollution output, what you can do to your workers, things like that. And so that's very useful, but it's not sufficient, and it's not the only thing. Government also has a very long history of funding innovation work that is oriented toward advancing public values. Not only government does this, but also nonprofits, other kinds of charities. Again, to go back to the polio vaccine, was largely funded by donors from across the United States. But of course, the fundamental know-how that went into making the polio vaccine was in part built upon government-funded research. And you can say that for a lot of other innovations as well, from airplanes to the internet. All these useful things have been supported in part by public purpose-oriented government investment. Governments can establish standards for what responsibility and ethical conduct looks like, both in the conduct of the innovation process and in the implementation of innovations. Excuse me. And can also set societal goals and either directly or indirectly coordinate private and public actors to try to achieve them in cases like the moonshot, for example.
Okay, so let me wrap up from that sober assessment of things by suggesting then one way to look at this book is, given that the critiques of innovation and their failure to deliver public values were not simply a product of the recent political regime, but have been ongoing, as you said to begin with, from the beginnings of our technological endeavors, the beginning of humanity itself. What hopefully we will have an opportunity for at some point in the not too distant future is a reset. And perhaps an advanced introduction to innovation and public values can provide a map for such a reset and move away from the inherent belief that innovation must be good and innovation is only a private sector activity to understanding that actually innovation belongs in the democratic arena where public values are determined and adjudicated. And your book provides not quite a recipe, but a framework for doing so. And if you'd like to disagree with that, you may. Otherwise, I'd say we can wrap up here.
I would just say that would probably achieve my greatest aspiration for the book.
Yeah, I certainly agree. I was going to say a major premise of the book, which is pretty common in this field of work, is that democratic governance is the best way to align any kind of collective human endeavor with public interest and public values. We've recognized that in the realm of government for a long time. I don't think we've recognized that in the realm of innovation for quite a long time, at least en masse as a society. And then hopefully we can recover a sense of the importance of that, both in government and in the broader society as well.
Gentlemen, may your book enjoy robust sales and even more than that, a robust impact on the way that we think about and talk about innovation and the public good. Thanks.